Scott Yates, Rockford Register Star.
Talon with Channel 17.
Okay, so looks like we're all here. I'll take note. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. We're going to kind of talk about a few things today. So first, we're going to talk about the officer-involved shooting by the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department that occurred on April 10th, 2021. We'll touch upon the April 11th officer-involved shooting with Rockford Police Department. Those are really just updates. Most of the facts, I mean, really all the facts that we can disclose have been disclosed at prior press conferences or in press releases. The focus or the meat of today's press conference will be the officer-involved fatal crash involving Rockford Police Department that occurred on April 25th. And so with that, let me give a brief update on the officer-involved shooting on April 10th. So the neighborhood canvass has been completed. The officer walkthrough was done. The date of the incident, the autopsy is in progress. Social media was checked. The medical information is being obtained. We're kind of in the midst of the investigation. Probably most of the tasks have been completed. Now we're just kind of waiting. So the best example for that, as we discussed last press conference, is the forensic evidence. So we're waiting on the crime lab to finish up their work. So that's kind of that case. And again, as a reminder, Mr. Glatigo was the deceased in that case. Next, we have the April 11th incident involving Rockford Police Officer McGinnis. The injured party in that case was Jose Gonzalez Jr. In terms of progress, again, pretty much in the middle of the investigation. I think officers from Rockford, most of the reports have been written. I think they're still some of them are still actually being written and provided to the task force. But again, really just waiting on some medical information for Gonzalez Jr. and the crime lab information. So those are the updates on those two cases. The incident that occurred on April 25th was an officer-involved fatal crash, and I just want to remind everyone that this is still an ongoing investigation. Our understanding of the facts may change, but I'm going to essentially almost read a factual statement, and of course I can take questions at the end. At approximately 4:42 p.m. on Sunday, April 25th, the Rockford Police Department scope officers initiated a traffic stop on a black 2020 Toyota Camry for traffic violations. I don't know what the exact traffic violations were at this time. The Toyota fled the scene in the area of Whitman Street and Church Street. The vehicle fled across Whitman Street and out of the sight of the officers. They did not continue any pursuit. There were multiple officers throughout Rockford who were on the radio attempting to relocate the suspect. At one point, an officer had checked the license plate reader and learned that the vehicle was last seen driving near the corner of South Main and Harrison Avenue. The vehicle's registered address was 3307 Nashville Drive in Rockford, Illinois. It was then Officer Geiken who turns north onto 9th Street from Sandy Hollow, and he saw the suspect vehicle, the Camry, turn north onto 9th Street from Sawyer, which was approximately a quarter mile ahead. At that time, Officer Geiken did not activate his emergency lights. He did not initiate a traffic stop, nor did he attempt to catch up to the vehicle while it was traveling on 9th Street. At about the same time, other officers arrived in the area of Brook Road and 9th Street. Brook Road is north of Sandy Hollow on 9th. And they see the suspect vehicle and were able to Well, again, they didn't have their lights or sirens on. And actually, the suspect vehicle at that time wasn't, it's not believed that it was traveling at a high rate of speed. They put down what are called stop sticks at that intersection. The suspect vehicle went northbound, traveled over those stop sticks, and the front, I think they believe one front tire and one rear tire was punctured. Again, they believe some of the tires were punctured. Exactly which, we're not sure at this point. And it was that time that the Camry increased its speed after going through the stop sticks. So the distance from Brook Road to Harrison, where the accident eventually occurred, is about a quarter of a mile. And the suspect vehicle, I'm sorry, not a quarter of a mile, a half mile from Brook Road to Harrison. And the Camry then entered the intersection of Harrison against a red light. An initial review shows that the suspect vehicle was traveling approximately 90 miles per hour when it entered the intersection. Officer Geiken continued to follow the vehicle, but the video and evidence right now shows that he was approximately a quarter of a mile behind the suspect, and again, never activated his emergency lights or siren, and he did not match the speed of the suspect vehicle as it sped up. There were other officers in the area. They were on Harrison at the intersection of Harrison and 9th on, I think, the west lane, if I'm reading this correctly, on the west lane. They, again, did not have their sirens on. They were just in the area because the call went out. There is camera footage from the squad cars facing the intersection when the suspect vehicle struck a tan Chevy Silverado that was traveling in the opposite, in the perpendicular with a green light. Another vehicle traveling near the Silverado was struck by the suspect vehicle. The driver of the Chevy Silverado, Raymond Jackson, was deceased. There were 2 passengers in the vehicle. They were minors. I believe their ages were 11 and 3. The driver of the vehicle was identified as Devonta Flint. He was the only occupant of the car. It's our understanding that he is still in the hospital receiving medical care. While receiving medical care, it was discovered that he had a bag strapped to his body. In that bag was approximately 40 grams of suspected heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, and approximately $600 cash. As I indicated, he was transported to the hospital, and we don't believe, he's still at the hospital. So there are the typical tasks that would accompany any investigation. In a case like this, you've got the dash cam video of the officers, and an accident reconstructionist came out to the scene. And that accident reconstructionist is part of the Integrity Task Force. And a little bit later, I'm going to talk about why the task force was activated. But I wanted to indicate that Devonta Smith that night was charged with traffic tickets of failure to reduce speed and disregarding a traffic control device. The investigation into Devonta Flint is still ongoing. I did want to talk about Devonta Smith because I think this may have come out, but this is public knowledge or public information, but I think it bears mentioning. So at the time of his arrest, there were 3 warrants out for his arrest, and he had the following pending charges. So 18 CF 996, which was pending at the time of this incident, was a delivery of a controlled substance, possession with intent to deliver a controlled substance, and possession of a stolen firearm. 18 CF 1001 is another incident in which he was charged with 2 counts of delivery of a controlled substance. Eventually, he was arrested on those charges. He was in custody of the sheriff's department. He then was released on a furlough over the state's objection, and he was furloughed to the Men's Life Recovery Program, which I believe is at the Rockford Rescue Mission. He was unsuccessfully discharged from the rescue mission and turned himself into the Winnebago County Jail. Later, while he's in custody, he gets another furlough to the Salvation Army Men's Rehabilitation Program. He fails to appear in court in October of 2019, and a bench warrant was issued. In September of 2019, there was another complaint and warrant issued for his arrest, and the complaint, which eventually he was indicted, was for aggravated battery to a pregnant person and domestic battery. As an important reminder, these are allegations. He's innocent until proven guilty or otherwise. That warrant is still outstanding. Next, in April of 2021, mid-April, a complaint and warrant is issued for his arrest. This is the third warrant. That complaint was for aggravated battery to a pregnant person. It's a different victim from the other ag-bat to a pregnant person, and domestic battery. That warrant was for $1,000. So again, we believe he's got a no bond warrant, a $50,000 warrant, and a $100,000 warrant. The significance of that is when he's released from the hospital, he'll be going to the Winnebago County Jail on those warrants. I did want to point out kind of why the Integrity Task Force has this, why they were activated. So I think I've talked about the Police and Community Relations Improvement Act essentially requires that an independent law enforcement agency investigate incidents that where there's an officer-involved death. So that's by statute. It has to happen. However, the Integrity Task Force in Winnebago and Boone County goes a little bit farther. It's broader. That can be activated. There doesn't have to necessarily be a death. So let's talk about the 3 cases. You've got the county case in which Faustino Guitago was deceased. The Integrity Task Force, per its own policy and guidelines, is activated, and the statute requires that there be an independent review. In the city case, where Gonzalez Jr. was injured, the statute doesn't require that be investigated by an independent agency. However, the Memorandum of Understanding and Policies and Procedures of the Integrity Task Force indicate that would be investigated by the task force, which is exactly what happened. Now, in this case, officer-involved death in the statute is actually defined as any death resulting from a motor vehicle accident if law enforcement was engaged in law enforcement activity involving the individual or the individual's vehicle in the process of apprehension or attempt to apprehend. So again, I don't want to speak for the chief of police of Rockford at the time, Chief O'Shea, but he believed that he didn't have all the information, but certainly it almost certainly fell under this definition because there was an attempt to apprehend the driver of the Camry. In addition, because our task force has policies and procedures that are broader than the statute, they could have been activated under that as well. It's also important to note that when they're activated within minutes of this happening. And so, Chief O'Shea at the time doesn't know what the pursuit was like, whether, a lot of the facts I explained today, he would not have known. And so that investigation was then taken over by the Illinois State Police, and more specifically the Integrity Task Force. So hopefully that answers a few of your questions. Let me check my outline real quick and make sure I got to everything that I needed to. Oh, one last thing. I actually want to compliment you all in the kind of minutes and hours and days since it happened. I've heard the word chase on multiple occasions, and in reading the articles that you've all put out, that word wasn't included, and I think that's really significant. This was a fatal crash involving an officer-involved fatal crash is generally what we would refer to this as. I think that's the appropriate way to describe it. And as the facts have borne out, we don't believe there was a chase or even if you could call it a pursuit. But I've been a little bit frustrated because people have said there was a chase. And again, as the facts have been described, I don't think that's an accurate depiction. And I appreciate the fact that having checked the articles and read the articles that you all have put out, that you used the phrase officer-involved fatal crash. So with that, any questions?
Will there be video released of this incident?
So I knew you were going to ask that, Chris. So I've talked to the city of Rockford, and if you recall, essentially it's ultimately up to the agency. However, I have advised them that I don't believe the video evidence should be released to the public. And there's really two reasons, and they're both important. Right now, there's no criminal investigation into the Rockford police officers. There's none. So that's number one. Number two, there is a criminal investigation into Devonta Flint. And while I don't admittedly have all the evidence, it is likely Mr. Flint will be charged as a result of his actions on that date. And so to protect his right to a fair trial, his constitutional rights, I don't believe it's appropriate for the video to be released. That is the recommendation that I gave to Rockford Police. Ultimately, the decision on whether to release the video rests with them. I don't suspect that they will release the video, the dash cam video.
So he was furloughed twice.
Correct.
What are the circumstances for someone being furloughed? How does that?
So I'm not totally, so I can talk about it generally.
Okay.
But, I'll just be frank. I looked up the history of Mr. Flint this morning. I haven't talked to the prosecutors with respect to the individual decision-making as to why he might have been furloughed not only once but twice. But a furlough is someone's in our jail, and they ask the judge to get out of jail. So here's a common example. Let's say someone's dad dies, and they're like, can you let me out of jail for 3 days so I can go to the funeral and spend time with my family? Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't. The judge says no. And the judge allows both the defense attorney and the prosecutor to argue as to why it's appropriate, and then ultimately makes a decision. So there are countless reasons someone could be furloughed. Probably the most common, or more common, is a medical furlough. Right? If someone's having a severe health issue in the jail, they can be furloughed to the hospital. Another common example is exactly what we have here. We have someone who's in jail, and as opposed to just reducing their bond, they're allowed to walk out of jail, and they're furloughed to a program, whether it's the Rockford Rescue Mission so that's what happens. That's a furlough. One of the things that I'll just be frank that we're going to look into a little bit is what happens when someone walks out of that front door. They're on furlough and they walk out of the door. Like, what is the mechanisms, and does the rescue mission have an obligation to notify the sheriff's office, for example? And those are questions that I need to get the answers to, and will. And even when I have those answers, I think we need to review those, those policies and procedures and make sure that we're keeping everyone safe. But I'm not going to stand up here and say all furloughs are bad. I mean, they are just a part of the criminal justice system. As you may have noticed, the first one in particular was granted over our objection. So the defense attorney asked the judge for a furlough. We said no, he should stay in jail, and despite our objection, he was released on furlough. So it's something that's allowed to be asked for and granted, but I still feel like kind of an audit of the process when it doesn't work, right? When someone kind of jumps their furlough and walks out of the front door, you know, how can we better make sure that those people go back to our jail?
I think going off of that, you know, someone died, you know, he was furloughed twice, and now someone died.
Yeah, I mean, you can point to the, I mean, well, obviously, it's a tragedy beyond belief. But remember, it's not the judge's fault for furloughing Mr. Flint. I mean, the blame rests, you know, to the extent, the blame rests with him. You know, it's not. But I do understand that, you know, it can look like, why was he out on furlough? And I don't know the numbers either. Again, I will become more educated on this. You know, I don't know of the 700 to 800 inmates that we have in our local jail, how many of them are currently on furlough. So.
Forgive me, I forget, or I didn't hear while I was taking pictures which incident you were referring to, but you mentioned an officer responding to a vehicle driving away, and the officer checking traffic camera data for the license plate, and he was able to determine the current location of the vehicle. Is he pulling from traffic cams over street lights that are taking pictures of cars driving by?
So,
Like license plate readers?
yes, it was a license plate reader. So I wish I knew.
From a street light?
What's that?
From a street light?
Well, so I think typically they are on street lights. I don't know exactly where this license plate reader was that picked up this vehicle.
But that was the...
That's how they, right, so like,
Okay.
as I understand it, right, they don't necessarily know where the vehicle is. They check the license plate readers, and then they know that it went through this intersection.
So it's that instantaneous, the database can identify a vehicle
My understanding is yes. I don't know the exact lag time, but it's
nearly...
pretty much real time. And I don't know if you caught it, but the vehicle was registered to a home that was kind of near the intersection of South Main and Harrison, where the LPR picked up that car. So, you know, again, it's still an investigation, but the implication is the officers went towards where the car was registered to.
One more question about Mr. Flint. So you said after he was furloughed and then he was unsuccessfully discharged?
So, again, I don't, what I believe that means is that he either wasn't participating in the program that he was furloughed to, for whatever reason, the initial furlough, he went back to the Winnebago County Jail.
And now he turned himself in, is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
You know, I'm doing a little bit of revisionist history because I'm looking at the docket in trying to piece together, you know, the timeline, which is fairly convoluted because he was in jail, out of jail, and then he picked up cases while he was out on warrants. As I discussed, he had 3 active warrants at the time of this incident.
You said officers are still writing their reports? Is that
So,
unusual?
you know, believe it or not, it's really not, because you'll have supplemental reports that may need to be done even as evidence comes in. So let me give you an example, Chris. You've got, let's say, well, the drugs are suspected controlled substances are, you know, gathered at the scene. Well, then they're put in a database to be tested by the lab, and then I'm the officer who goes and grabs that evidence and takes it to the lab. I'm going to write a supplemental report on that. Or, you know, a supervisor might read a police report and say, hey, you should have asked this witness these 5 questions. You know, go back and ask them those 5 questions. And so sometimes they do a supplemental report. Maybe it's an amendment to the draft report they've drafted. So I'm not trying to suggest that there's any kind of obstruction at all. It's just that it's not like in the first 48 hours every report's written. So if I gave that impression, my apologies. It was probably just me being loose with my language.
So he's in jail right now, and then, or I'm sorry, he's in the hospital right now.
Yes.
Once he's released, then he's going to jail.
Yeah, I mean,
On
he'll
the
be
warrant.
on the warrants, yes.
On the warrant. And then we don't know what charges yet he could face in this case. Is that
No,
right?
I'm not ready to announce whether there'll be charges. I'm indicating there's a criminal investigation into Mr. Flint's actions on that night.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. So, I've been on this rhythm of every 2 weeks, the Thursday. So in 2 weeks from now, that Thursday, we won't have a press conference. I've talked to the commander of the task force. There just won't be enough to talk about. And so if I feel like there needs to be something, a certain detail, I'll put out a press release. But we won't be having a press conference 2 weeks from now. All right? All right, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.